The Atlantic was a graveyard. Waves slammed against the hulls of Allied convoys, the cold spray stinging the faces of sailors who prayed for a day without death. Somewhere beneath the rolling swells, German U-boats lurked like shadows, waiting to strike. Torpedoes sliced through the water with deadly precision, tearing ships apart, swallowing men, ammunition and hope in an instant. Every convoy felt like a gamble with fate itself, and every loss sent ripples of fear back to the factories and ports that were supposed to keep the lifeline alive. Before the war, it had taken 230 days to build a single Liberty ship. 230 days. By the time a ship slid into the water, it was almost too late. Supplies ran short. Soldiers went hungry. Guns sat idle. Entire battles depended on whether the next ship could arrive on time. And yet, in the chaos of war, these convoys were being destroyed faster than they could be replaced. The situation was desperate, so desperate that even the military brass whispered the unthinkable. We may not be able to win this if we can't supply our troops. Into this storm of doubt and danger stepped Henry J. Kaiser, a civilian industrialist with a reputation for audacity. He was not a naval officer, not a government bureaucrat, not even a traditional shipbuilder. He was a man who built dams, roads, and cities from nothing, a man who believed that obstacles were just puzzles waiting to be solved. But even Kaiser had to pause when faced with the task before him. Revolutionize shipbuilding in a war where lives depended on speed, and do so fast enough to tip the scales. Kaiser stood in his office, maps and schematics scattered around him, eyes scanning the numbers that made even seasoned engineers shake their heads. Ships lost to U-boats, production bottlenecks, shortages of steel and workers. He saw them all not as barriers, but as challenges. Impossible, others whispered. But Kaiser's mind raced with the kind of solutions that seemed to belong in a dream, not a shipyard. The emotional weight was suffocating. Every day lost in production meant thousands of lives. Soldiers stranded on beaches, civilians left hungry, battles that might have been won slipping through the cracks. If he failed, the cost wouldn't be measured in dollars or reputation. It would be measured in blood. And yet, if he succeeded, if he could bend the rules of industry and physics, if he could make the impossible possible, then the war and history itself might change. The Atlantic roared outside the office windows, a reminder of the enemy that waited beyond the horizon. Somewhere out there, another Liberty ship was being torpedoed, another convoy shredded by invisible killers below the waves. But Kaiser didn't flinch. He didn't see despair. He saw opportunity. And in that moment, he made a silent promise. He would find a way to make ships appear faster than anyone thought possible. Not in months, not in weeks, but so fast that the word impossible would be rewritten forever. And as the first shadow of doubt crept into the minds of those around him, one question hung in the air. Could one man's vision really outpace death itself? Henry J. Kaiser didn't come from a naval background, nor did he ever step foot in a shipyard before the war demanded it. He was a builder, a man who had carved his name into steel, concrete, and mountains. Roads, dams, bridges, entire cities had sprung from his vision, all completed with a speed and efficiency that earned him a reputation as a man who could turn the impossible into reality. But this was different. The stakes were higher. Lives were on the line, and the clock was counting down, with every ship sinking into the icy Atlantic. Kaiser paced in his office, eyes darting from one blueprint to another. He had been studying the production schedules, the bottlenecks, and the traditional methods of shipbuilding, and a thought hit him so forceful it made him stop in his tracks. Why not build ships like cars? Why not apply assembly line techniques, modular construction, and prefabrication to Liberty ships? It sounded absurd even to him, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. If a factory could churn out automobiles in days rather than months, why couldn't the same principles apply to steel leviathans meant to carry tanks, ammunition, and food to the front lines? Kaiser presented his idea to Navy officials and seasoned shipbuilders in Washington. The room was thick with skepticism, eyes narrowed, lips pressed into lines of disbelief. One veteran shipbuilder scoffed, "Ships aren't cars, Mr. Kaiser. You can't bolt together a battleship like a Ford sedan." Another officer shook his head, muttering, "This would be a disaster. Steel, manpower, logistics, everything would collapse." But Kaiser was undeterred. He leaned forward, his voice calm but insistent. "It's not just an idea. It's a system. Prefabricated hull sections, multiple shipyards working simultaneously, teams specialized in modular assembly. If we coordinate it right, we could cut construction time drastically, weeks instead of months. Lives saved instead of lost." The room fell silent. Skepticism lingered like a thick fog. And yet beneath that doubt a flicker of curiosity ignited. Could this civilian really have found a loophole in a system that had been deemed unchangeable for decades? Kaiser began assembling a small, trusted team of engineers, designers, and foremen. They met in warehouses and offices, scribbling diagrams on blackboards and pacing over concrete floors. He introduced methods that had never been applied to shipbuilding. Hull sections fabricated off-site, standardized parts to simplify assembly, and multiple ships constructed in parallel rather than one at a time. Each suggestion seemed radical, almost reckless, but that was precisely what the moment demanded. He understood the stakes better than anyone. Failure would be catastrophic. Resources wasted, steel lost, time squandered, and most importantly, lives left vulnerable on the battlefield. But he also saw the promise. If this system worked, supply lines could become nearly unstoppable. Convoys could arrive faster, more soldiers could be fed and armed, and the tide of the war might shift in favor of the Allies. Every day, Kaiser faced resistance. Navy officials questioned budgets, bureaucrats doubted logistics, and shipyard managers muttered under their breath about the crazy civilian attempting to rewrite decades of tradition. Yet Kaiser's persistence was relentless. He knew the only way forward was to prove the method in practice, to demonstrate that speed and precision could coexist without sacrificing safety. Late nights found him in offices with drafting tables strewn with blueprints and diagrams. Steelworkers' voices echoed from distant yards, a constant reminder that action was the only proof of his vision. He meticulously planned every stage of construction, calculating the flow of materials, timing the workforce shifts, and coordinating multiple locations to work in unison. It was a logistical ballet on an unprecedented scale, and the world would soon watch to see whether it was genius or folly, as he prepared to pitch his plan for the first test project. One thought haunted him. This wasn't just about building ships. This was about redefining what industry could accomplish under pressure. And if he failed, history would remember it as a cautionary tale. But if he succeeded, the word impossible itself would be forever changed. The officials left his office still skeptical, muttering and shaking their heads. Yet in that room, something had shifted. Kaiser's vision had taken root, and with it, the first seeds of a revolution in shipbuilding were planted. Seeds that would soon grow faster than anyone imagined, challenging tradition, risk, and even death itself. Convincing others to follow a civilian's radical plan was no small feat. Shipyard managers frowned at Henry Kaiser as if he were proposing to build a skyscraper in mid-air. Government officials shuffled papers nervously, whispering doubts behind polished desks. "It can't be done," one muttered. "Ships aren't machines you assemble in a factory line," another insisted. But Kaiser stood firm, calm yet unyielding, his eyes scanning the floor as if he could already see the ships taking shape in his mind. "Look," he said, pointing to a diagram spread across the table. "We'll break each ship into manageable sections. Hulls, decks, superstructures, all prefabricated and ready to assemble. Multiple shipyards working simultaneously. Teams trained for precision? If we coordinate correctly, one ship can go from blueprint to launch in weeks, not months." Skepticism hung in the air like fog, but slowly curiosity replaced doubt. Engineers leaned forward, examining diagrams. Foremen tapped pencils against the table. Some workers exchanged wary glances, others scoffed outright. Yet the first seeds of possibility were planted. Kaiser's vision soon took physical form. Across sprawling shipyards, prefabricated hull sections arrived like giant puzzle pieces. Cranes lifted massive steel plates into place, while teams of welders and riveters worked with a synchronization previously unheard of in shipbuilding. Dozens of ships were under construction at once, their skeletal frames rising in parallel like giants awakening from slumber. But progress was never smooth. Mistakes erupted almost daily. A hull section misaligned, forcing workers to tear it down and start over. Supply delays threatened to halt production entirely. Engineers stayed awake late into the night, recalculating schedules and material flows. Men and women labored 12-hour shifts, sweat streaking their faces, muscles aching, hearts pounding, as if each rivet carried the weight of the war itself.
Among them was young steelworker Joe Patterson, barely 20, who had never seen anything like this before. "I thought shipbuilding was slow, methodical," he whispered to a colleague as sparks flew around them. This feels like chaos." Yet amid the chaos, a rhythm emerged. Workers began anticipating each other's moves. Cranes glided along tracks with uncanny precision, and steel plates slid into place as if guided by invisible hands. Failures still came, though, haunting the team. One section collapsed under its own weight, a near disaster that could have injured dozens. Another day, a critical rivet misfired, threatening to set back the schedule by weeks. Each failure pressed heavily on Kaiser's shoulders. The world was watching, and if the test ship failed, his methods could be declared a folly, scrapped forever. As the first ship neared completion, tension in the yards reached a breaking point. Workers paused mid-task, eyes flicking toward the nearly finished hull that loomed above them. Engineers held their breath, their calculations in hand. Government officials arrived, clutching clipboards, faces pale with doubt. Even the seasoned welders, who had labored under Kaiser's regime for weeks, whispered among themselves, unsure whether their efforts would pay off or be swept away as another failed experiment. Kaiser walked along the dockside, helmet in hand, watching every movement. He could see the anticipation etched into the faces of every worker, the silent prayers for a success that seemed almost too ambitious. In that moment, the enormity of what they were attempting became tangible. This was more than building a ship. It was reshaping the very notion of possibility. The first test ship loomed on the slipway, its steel hull gleaming under the morning sun. For weeks, this vessel had been a symbol of hope, fear, and relentless human effort. Now everything would be revealed. If it launched successfully, the assembly line method could revolutionize shipbuilding. If it failed, the experiment would collapse, and so too would the confidence of everyone who had dared to follow Kaiser's audacious plan. And so the yards held their collective breath, the wind carrying a silence that seemed almost unnatural. Every rivet, every bolt, every welded seam was a heartbeat in a machine powered by human courage. As the ship's keel met the water for the first time, the question remained suspended in the air. Could the impossible truly be made real? Or was history about to witness another dream crushed under the weight of reality? The morning sun glinted off the steel hull of the first Liberty ship built under Henry Kaiser's assembly line plan, casting long shadows across the dockyard. Workers gathered in clusters, their faces streaked with soot and sweat, each pair of eyes fixed on the vessel that seemed almost too large, too ambitious, to be real. Government officials stood apart, clipboards in hand, fingers tapping nervously against polished wood. The air was thick with anticipation, a mixture of hope, fear, and disbelief. Kaiser walked along the edge of the slipway, his boots crunching on gravel, eyes scanning every detail. This was the moment that would decide everything. If the ship failed to launch properly, his entire vision could be dismissed as a reckless gamble. Yet despite the pressure, there was a quiet confidence in him, a steady resolve born from months of planning, calculation, and unwavering faith in his team. The first ship had been assembled in record time. Hull sections, prefabricated at distant yards, had arrived like enormous puzzle pieces. Teams of welders, riveters, and engineers had worked in unison, their movements choreographed with the precision of a ballet. Every bolt tightened, every seam welded, every deck installed had been executed with meticulous care. And now, as the vessel teetered on the brink of its inaugural journey, the world seemed to hold its breath. A signal was given. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the ship began to slide down the greased slipway. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by silence so thick it seemed the Atlantic itself had paused to watch. The steel Leviathan moved steadily, gaining momentum, water lapping at its bow. Sparks from welding torches reflected in the eyes of the workers, flickering like fireflies in the morning haze. Every heart in the yard beat in unison, tethered to the ship's every inch of progress. Then, with a final shudder and a roar of water, the ship touched the Atlantic, sending a towering splash into the air. Cheers erupted spontaneously, echoing across the docks. Workers embraced each other, tears streaming down faces lined with grime and exhaustion. Government officials, who had arrived skeptical, clapped and whispered astonished praise. Kaiser allowed himself a brief smile, but his gaze remained sharp. Success was exhilarating, yet this was only the beginning. One ship did not make a fleet, and the real challenge lay ahead. Could this method be replicated on a scale large enough to impact the war? The emotional resonance of the moment was immediate and profound. For the first time, the impossible had been proven possible. Soldiers and sailors far from the shipyard would soon benefit from this revolution in speed and efficiency. Supplies that might have taken months to reach the front lines could now arrive in weeks or days. Lives would be saved, battles reinforced, and hope restored. The morale boost extended far beyond the workers' yards. The nation felt the pulse of progress beating stronger than ever. Yet even amid the celebration, tension lingered. The ship was a marvel, yes, but it was only the prototype. Kaiser knew that scaling production would expose new challenges. Supply chains would be stretched, workforce coordination tested, and bureaucratic scrutiny intensified. Every successful launch increased the stakes. One misstep in the coming months could undo months of innovation and tireless effort. As the ship floated steadily in the harbor, cranes swinging gently above and waves rippling around its hull, workers began clearing the decks, polishing surfaces, and preparing the vessel for its first voyage. Conversations buzzed with excitement and speculation. "Can we really do this with 10 more ships?" a young welder asked. A foreman grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. "If this one is anything to go by, we'll see ships sailing faster than anyone thought possible." Kaiser observed the scene quietly, absorbing both the jubilation and the underlying pressure. This success was proof that his unconventional vision had merit, but it was also a reminder that the war waited for no man. The Atlantic still churned with danger. Convoys still faced the threat of U-boats, and every ship that failed to reach the front lines was a life lost. One ship had defied expectations. The task now was to turn it into a fleet, and to do so before the enemy could adapt. As he turned away from the harbor, Kaiser's mind was already racing, calculating schedules, workforce allocation, and material shipments. The first miracle ship had sailed, and with it a wave of hope. But the journey was far from over. The question lingered in every mind at the dockyard. Could the impossible be done again and again, until Liberty ships appeared every 4 days instead of every 230? The first ship's success was more than a triumph. It was a spark that ignited a revolution. Across the United States, shipyards buzzed with unprecedented activity. Prefabricated hull sections rolled off assembly lines in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and San Francisco, traveling by rail and barge to waiting docks along the coasts. Kaiser's methods, once dismissed as reckless, were now the blueprint for a nationwide effort. Dozens of ships were under construction at once, their massive forms rising simultaneously, like steel titans stretching toward the sky. Yet scaling production was far from easy. Supply shortages threatened daily. Steel shipments arrived late or in insufficient quantities. Rivets ran low, and engines were often delayed by transportation bottlenecks. Workers labored longer and harder than ever before, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, muscles screaming from the relentless pace. Fatigue gnawed at even the most experienced men and women. Mistakes began to multiply. A misaligned hull, a cracked weld, a shipment of parts sent to the wrong dock. Each error risked derailing the entire process, and the pressure mounted with every passing hour. Bureaucracy added another layer of tension. Government officials worried that Kaiser's methods, as brilliant as they were, might collapse under their own complexity. Meetings in Washington were tense affairs. with senior Navy officers questioning the sustainability of this accelerated production. "We can't possibly maintain this pace," they warned. "Someone will get hurt and we'll waste more than we gain." But Kaiser remained unflappable. He understood that innovation always carried risk, and that the reward far outweighed the danger. His brilliance lay not only in the idea but in the execution. Kaiser devised new systems to track the flow of materials across shipyards. Prefabricated sections were color-coded, numbered, and scheduled with military precision. Teams worked in shifts around the clock, guided by detailed blueprints and supervisors trained to anticipate every bottleneck. Communication networks linked yards hundreds of miles apart, allowing adjustments in real time. No detail was too small. Every rivet, every plate, every weld was accounted for.
The results were astonishing. Ships that had once taken 230 days to build now slid into the water in a matter of weeks. And then, as processes improved, the unimaginable became reality. A new Liberty ship was being completed every 4 days. Convoys that had been desperately awaited for months could now arrive on schedule, fully loaded, ready to sustain armies and civilians alike. The rhythm of production, once glacial, had become a heartbeat of the war effort, pulsing with precision and power. Workers felt the shift too. Steelworker Joe Patterson, who had once marveled at the chaos of the first assembly line, now moved with practiced ease. Teams anticipated each other's needs. Cranes swung in perfect harmony, and rivets were set as though the shipyard itself had learned to breathe. Even the most skeptical officials began to see the genius of Kaiser's methods, not just in speed, but in coordination, in foresight, and in human ingenuity. Yet tension never fully dissipated. Every ship launched successfully was another reminder of what was at stake. Supply chains were fragile. Fatigue threatened accidents. Enemy submarines still prowled the Atlantic. Could this pace be sustained? Could the system endure as war demands intensified, as the fleet grew larger and deadlines tighter? Every success carried with it the shadow of the next challenge, and Kaiser knew that complacency could spell disaster. Despite the pressure, morale soared. Workers took pride in their roles, knowing that each rivet, each weld, each completed section contributed directly to saving lives. Ships arriving in Europe, once a distant hope, now became tangible proof of their labor's impact. News of the accelerated production spread, inspiring confidence not only among workers but across the nation. Kaiser's vision had transformed a struggling system into a machine of nearly unstoppable efficiency, and the Allies began to feel the difference at the front lines. As Kaiser moved from yard to yard, watching ships take shape like clockwork, he allowed himself a quiet moment of satisfaction. The impossible had been scaled, yet the war continued to demand more. Every completed ship was both a triumph and a challenge, a promise that the system could and must endure. The question hung over every dock and office. Could this unprecedented pace hold as the world's largest conflict intensified? And as the Atlantic waters awaited the next convoy, every worker, engineer, and official knew they were part of something extraordinary, a revolution in production that could tip the balance of the war itself. The Liberty ships had begun arriving in Europe, their steel hulls cutting through stormy seas and icy winds, carrying the lifeblood of armies, ammunition, food, tanks, and medical supplies. For soldiers entrenched in battle, these ships were more than transportation, they were salvation. In ports from England to North Africa, docks that once stood half empty now teemed with cargo, cranes swinging in precise arcs, unloading supplies with unprecedented speed. The war effort was shifting in real time, and the change was visible to anyone willing to look. On the front lines, the difference was immediate and tangible. Soldiers, who had once scavenged for rations, now found regular deliveries of food and equipment. Reinforcements arrived on schedule, artillery units were fully supplied, and field hospitals received desperately needed medicine. Accounts of battles where shortages had previously hindered success were rewritten. Entire operations that might have faltered were bolstered by the steady, Reliable arrival of Liberty ships. Every crate unloaded was a life saved. Every tank delivered a chance at victory. Sailors who had endured the perilous Atlantic crossings shared stories that put human faces on the numbers. Lieutenant James Carter, steering a convoy through a fog of U-boat attacks, remembered gripping the wheel as torpedoes streaked past. "If we hadn't had these ships, the front lines would have collapsed," he said. "We were running on hope and guts." These Liberty ships, they were more than cargo. They were lifelines. Across the docks, dock workers whispered similar sentiments. Their pride mingled with exhaustion. Every ship they had helped build was proof that human ingenuity could bend the tide of war. Kaiser's methods, once doubted by officials and experts alike, had transformed the logistics of warfare. Ships arrived faster, in greater numbers, and in a predictable cadence that allowed commanders to plan offensives with confidence. Where supply chains had been fragile and unpredictable, now they were dependable, almost unstoppable. The speed at which the Liberty ships moved from U.S. shipyards to European ports was staggering. What had once required months was now accomplished in days. Entire theaters of war felt the difference. The emotional impact on soldiers and civilians alike was profound. Letters home spoke of gratitude and relief, of families sustained by food and fuel, of troops who could finally hold their ground because supplies arrived when needed. For the first time, many realized that the course of the war wasn't just being decided by generals on distant battlefields, but by civilians thousands of miles away, working tirelessly in shipyards, applying ingenuity and courage to solve seemingly insurmountable problems. In London, officers and military planners marveled at the consistency and scale of deliveries. "It's unlike anything we've seen," a logistics commander admitted. "We can move entire armies and equipment in ways that were previously impossible. Whoever thought a civilian industrialist could achieve this?" His voice trailed off, the unspoken awe hanging in the room. Kaiser's vision had not only solved a logistical nightmare, it had altered the trajectory of the war itself. The narrative of the Atlantic War began to change. Convoys once decimated by U-boats were reinforced with ships arriving every 4 days. Battles that might have ended in retreat were sustained. Offensives that might have faltered were executed with precision. And in every port, in every dockyard, the human cost of delay was clear. Each missed shipment had once meant hunger, fear, and death. Now, thanks to one man's relentless drive and innovation, thousands of lives were spared, morale surged, and hope returned to the front lines. Kaiser observed reports of arrivals from his offices in the United States, a quiet satisfaction tempered by awareness of the ongoing war. The success of a single shipyard had multiplied into an entire fleet, and the consequences were undeniable. The impossible had been made possible. A civilian's ingenuity had outpaced the enemy, outmaneuvered doubt, and reshaped the logistics of global conflict. For the men and women on both sides of the Atlantic, the impact was real, immediate, and unforgettable. As the sun set over the bustling European ports, the Liberty ships glided into harbor one after another, a relentless stream of steel and hope. Each vessel symbolized not only progress in the war effort, but a testament to human innovation and perseverance. The message was clear. When courage, vision, and ingenuity converge, even the most impossible challenges can be overcome. And in the midst of war's chaos, one civilian had quietly rewritten the rules, leaving a legacy that would ripple through history long after the guns fell silent. The roar of shipyard cranes had faded, and the Liberty ships now glided into the history books as symbols of ingenuity, courage, and relentless determination. Henry J. Kaiser stood quietly in his office, the hum of industry a distant echo, reflecting on what had been accomplished. A civilian with no naval training had not only transformed shipbuilding, but had changed the very pace of war. The impossible had become reality, not by luck, but through vision, perseverance, and a refusal to accept that's just the way things are. Kaiser's methods did more than win battles. They revolutionized American industry. The assembly line techniques, prefabrication, and modular construction pioneered for Liberty ships spilled over into housing projects, automobile factories, and post-war infrastructure. Entire cities were built faster, more efficiently, and with fewer resources, thanks to the lessons learned in the shipyards. The wartime rush had become a blueprint for progress, proving that innovation under pressure could ripple far beyond its original purpose. Workers who had once doubted the speed and feasibility of Kaiser's vision now looked back with pride. Men and women who had labored long hours, facing exhaustion and uncertainty, could see the tangible results of their efforts: fleets of ships crossing oceans, lives saved on distant battlefields, and a nation strengthened by ingenuity. The human cost of doubt and delay had been transformed into the triumph of coordination, skill, and collective effort. Even decades later, the ripple effects endured. Prefabricated housing made affordable homes possible for returning veterans. Automotive assembly lines became models for efficiency worldwide. Modern shipbuilding continued to benefit from the systems Kaiser had put in place, proving that innovation born of necessity often leaves the deepest legacy. One man's bold idea had reshaped not just a single war, but the trajectory of American industry itself. The story of the Liberty ships carries a moral that resonates beyond history lessons. Courage, vision, and perseverance can defy expectations. One person, armed with determination and ingenuity, can challenge the impossible and succeed where many feared to try. Kaiser's achievement reminds us that systems, traditions, and even the harshest obstacles are malleable when met with intellect, persistence, and unwavering belief in a better solution. As the sun set over the harbors that had once been the stage for such daring innovation, the steel leviathans rested quietly in the water, symbols of human triumph over uncertainty. Each ship was a testament to the people who had labored tirelessly, to the civilian who dared to dream bigger than anyone else, and to the power of a single vision to change history. Kaiser's legacy was not only the ships themselves, but the hope and inspiration they carried, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, ingenuity and courage can illuminate the path forward. And in the end, it was clear: history is shaped not just by generals and governments, but by those willing to imagine the impossible and then make it real.